Speaker of the House, Mike Johnson. Great to have you on, Mr. Speaker. I know that you've been getting a lot of pushback from your colleagues on this, but why do you feel this is the best package right now?
Well, this is about the only thing we can do. And let me explain what's happening here. I don't disagree with anything that my friends there just said because I'm a fiscal conservative as well. Remember, at this moment, we only have control of 1/2 of the federal government. We have a razor-thin Republican majority in only one chamber. All this changes in January, of course, thankfully because of the election. But right now, we got to do this short-term funding measure to get us to March 14th. This was the conservative play call. We don't normally like what's called a continuing resolution, a CR, but in this case it makes sense because if we push it into the first quarter of next year, then we have a Republican-controlled Congress and President Donald J. Trump back in the White House will be able to have more say over the funding decisions for 2025. Now, that would have been an easier thing to do, but then we had circumstances outside of our control. We had these emergencies that are required. So we had, as you know, a record hurricane season. We had Helene and Milton, and they just did massive destruction across our red states, frankly, in the southeast and the eastern side of the country. And then we've had farmers who are in jeopardy of permanently going under. They've had 3 lost years in a row because of Bidenomics and inflation and other circumstances outside of their control. And so when you cobble those two things together, there's a desperate need for that aid, and that's what adds another $100+ billion to the bill, and that's why everybody's uncomfortable with it. I am too. We have a massive deficit and debt problem, of course, in this country. We can begin to address that and shrink the size and scope of government in January with Republican control, but we've got to bridge the gap to get there, and we cannot leave our small farms and ranchers and our people who are devastated by the hurricanes out in the meantime. So that's the difficult part about this. That's what people are really struggling with, and I am too, but we have a responsibility here, and that's legislating.
Yeah, Mr. Speaker, obviously a lot of the folks we're hearing from are some of the usual suspects on these kinds of deals. They're calling it, we heard garbage, a crap sandwich, a mess. But we're also hearing from folks in the Senate, even some what would be considered more moderate Republicans in the House. Senator Rick Scott, Josh Hawley are coming out against this. Do you think this package will get majority support from Republicans in either chamber?
I do, because there's also a lot of wins in this. We got, for example, PBM reform. We're taking the middlemen out of healthcare, which will dramatically drive down the cost of medication for Americans. That's been a #1 agenda item for a lot of us for a long time. We've got a restriction on outbound investment to restrict investment on the CCP, the Chinese military advancement and apparatus there. We got a 1-year delay on the beneficial ownership reporting requirement that most small businesses in this country didn't even know was due by January 1. And there was going to be a $10,000 fine if they forgot to do it. So there's a lot of things in here that are also Republican priorities that made sense to squeeze in. But look, it turned out to be a large bill because of these disaster provisions and the healthcare extenders, and that's what's got people nervous. But I'll say this. Moving this aside, we are paving the way for President Trump to come in with the America First agenda roaring back in January when we actually have control over all the levers of power in Washington, and we can advance our priorities. But we got to bridge the gap to do that. Let me just say this about the small farmers and ranchers. If we did not provide this aid right now, many of these 3rd, 4th generation and more family farms go out of business. Here's the problem with that. If we reduce domestic food supply, that's directly related to national security. And once they go out of business, they don't reopen. So that's the problem. 3 lost years in a row because of droughts and Bidenomics and all the rest. And the creditors and the lenders are not able to give the small food producers what they need to bridge the gap to get them into the planting season in the spring. So this has to happen right now and can't wait until the early part of the year. And that's the part of the struggle on this.
So I want to talk to you about the 72-hour rule given to members of Congress. 1,500 pages is a lot to get through by Friday. And then the Senate would also need to act pretty quickly to push this through before that Friday midnight deadline. Realistically speaking, is that enough time?
Yeah, look, the 72-hour principle is an important one to maintain. Obviously, we need legislators to read the bills before they vote on them. We can't help that the Senate slow-walked the negotiation. They did that intentionally. They're trying to jam us. We have a lot of members who are saying we can speed this up because we're reviewing it, we're going through the sections, but we'll see how that shakes out. We have to get this job done to bridge the gap again, to get into the first part of the new year, and I'm confident we'll be able to do that. And then we can start anew in January. We begin January 3rd. That's when the new Congress takes our oath of office. That's when Republicans are back in charge, and we'll be able to have our our agenda to limit the size and scope of government, and that starts in earnest as soon as we get going with President Trump.
You know, Mr. Speaker, you've got a very slim majority right now, a slim majority in the new Congress next year. Do you have any concerns that this deal will impact the vote for your speakership to continue, or might this cost you the gavel?
No, I don't think it will. I mean, look, we have a series of difficult choices, and it doesn't matter who the speaker is. We'd be facing the same exact dilemma. We've tried to navigate this as best as possible and chosen the least of the bad options in front of us. No one wants to spend $110 billion, but when you have emergencies that are actually, you know, as they're legally called acts of God, these are not man-made disasters, they're outside of our control, and there's a certain principle that the federal government has some role to play. So we don't like that. We don't like spending money. But in a case like this, you know, to be frank, it would be the red states that are left out. It would be the rural areas. You know, Democrats don't have a big priority on the agriculture community because they don't have that in their districts. These are Republican states and Republican districts, and we would be derelict in our duty if we didn't take care of them. So that's the part of this that is uncomfortable for people. We don't like spending money, but we have to do it responsibly.
So real quick, I know you have to go, but President-elect Donald Trump has yet to weigh in publicly on this spending deal. Have you spoken to him about it?
Yeah, well, I was in constant contact with President Trump and his team, the chief of staff, and all the domestic policy advisors. They know exactly what we're doing and why. And I was on a text chain last night with Elon and Vivek about DOGE, because I'm super excited about that. And I said, guys, these are the necessary things. They don't like spending either. They said, we know this is not you personally, Mr. Speaker, and we got to get through this. So, look, everybody understands the necessity. It is not palatable. This is the sausage-making part of legislation that nobody likes, but we're governing. And we'll pick it up in January and start a brand new day for America.
All right, Speaker Mike Johnson, thank you so much for waking up early and taking the time this morning.
You got it. Thank you.
Information. Truth is freedom. Is Newsmax. It's real news for real people.